Now today, we're going to explore three different regions of the northern half of Israel. Now first of all, we're going to explore the northern coastal plain that is referred to in the Bible as the plain of Asher. Now then we'll move inland and explore the Jezreel Valley, which you'll notice shaped like an arrowhead. Now on the left-hand side of it is Megiddo. On the right-hand side is Nazareth, and the shaft at the bottom of the arrowhead is the Harod Valley, which goes down to Bethshan and the Jordan River. Now the mountainous region to its north is what's referred to as the Galilee. Now in today's presentation I've also included the Sea of Galilee and the Hula or Upper Jordan River Valley to the north of the Sea of Galilee. Now we're going to look at four places along the plain of Asher today. Now the first is Haifa, Israel's third largest city. Then the beautiful port city of Akko at the opposite end of the Bay of Haifa. And at the very top of Israel, we'll look at Rosh Hanikra and the Geshet Cave. Now the Bible has little to say about the plain of Asher. Now only Akko is mentioned specifically by name. Now notice further north, the Lebanese city of Tyre. Now further north from that, it was the city of Sidon. Now it's quite likely that Elijah, when he dwelt with the widow at Zarephath, and also Jesus, when he visited Tyre and Sidon in Matthew 15, passed along the northern coast of the plain of Asher. Now Haifa is Israel's third largest city and largest port today, situated where the Carmel Range meets the Mediterranean coast. Now, while there was a small early settlement here in biblical times, there is no reference to Haifa in the Bible. Now, Haifa today is a cosmopolitan city, and one of the most popular tourist attractions is the Baha'i Gardens. And it's a symbol of the cosmopolitan lifestyle coming into view here now. Now, I've got mixed feelings about this attraction. Now, it's an absolutely beautiful landscape garden with its many tiers, but I am uneasy about it being such a prominent feature here of an Eastern religion, knowing how God felt about ancient Israel mixing his religion with others in the Bible. Now at the bottom of the gardens is a wonderful boulevard lined with many restaurants. Now a few decades ago, a Bronze Age shipwreck from the time of ancient Israel was found off the coast of Haifa with a cargo of tin ingots or bars. Now, technology has improved since the shipwreck was found, and recently the ingots were chemically analysed, and it was actually determined that the tin had been imported from Cornwall in Britain. And now we're swinging around to the view along the Mount Carmel Range, east towards the Jezreel Valley. Now, about a mile inland from the coast on the northern end of Haifa Bay is Tel Akko, shown here. Now, Judges 1:31 tells us that the tribe of Asher failed to drive out the Canaanites in this city. Now, the Tel was abandoned in the late Greek period when the city moved to the coast, shown here, at the northern end of the Bay of Haifa, where it had an important Crusader and Muslim history. Now, in the Greek and Roman period, it was known as Ptolemais before becoming known as Akko or Acre. Now we read in Acts 21:7 that the Apostle Paul stopped at Ptolemais here before sailing on to Caesarea at the end of his third missionary journey. Now in 1799, Napoleon engaged in a 2-month siege of the port city, only to be repulsed by the Turks, aided by the British. Now today, Akko is a beautiful walled city and coastal fishing port filled with Arab Old World charm. Now further north of Akko, on the border with Lebanon, are the sea grotto caves of Rosh Hanikra, which means head of the grotto. Now they are beautiful limestone caves carved out by sea erosion. Now here's another view of the headland that forms Rosh Hanikra. Now on the opposite side of the building at the top here is the border crossing with Lebanon. Now Andrew Nelson, shown here with his wife Dale, had quite an interesting chat with one of the guards patrolling the border up there. And here we are on the chairlift about to go down to the caves. And the photo on the right shows the view back south to Akko and Haifa. Now we saw kids jumping off the cliffs there, and in the top right you can just barely make out one of the naval vessels that were patrolling the border. Now about 15 minutes drive inland from Rosh Hanikra, close to the Lebanese border, is another wonderful natural feature, Keshed Cave, which is not really a cave but a natural arch. Now I was so glad that we went there just for this incredible view of the entire northwest quarter of the land of Israel. Now Rosh Hanikra is that headland at the far right of the top photo, and in the bottom photo is Jeff Robson taking a photo of his daughter Stephanie against that backdrop of that wonderful view. Now the next region in northern Israel we're going to look at is the Jezreel Valley. Now Jezreel means God sows. Now as I've mentioned previously, the valley is shaped like an arrow. Now at the northern top, overlooking the valley, at the northern tip, overlooking the valley is Mount Carmel. Now below that mountain is the Kishon River, which flows through a narrow pass that connects the Jezreel Valley with the plain of Asher. Now Mount Carmel overlooks the Yokneam Pass through the Carmel Range to the coast. Now just to the east of Mount Carmel is a site that's being proposed actually for Israel's next international airport, which would have come in very handy with the recent crisis with Gaza threatening the main airport near Tel Aviv. Now going south of Mount Carmel is another pass through the Carmel Range called the Aruna or Megiddo Pass, which was guarded by the city of Megiddo, from which comes the apocalyptic name of Armageddon. Now going further south, you notice how Mount Gilboa is connected to and juts out north from the Sumerian highlands. Now at its base, northern base, is the Harod spring, which is where Gideon's army was reduced to only 300 men. Now through the shaft of the arrowhead, along the shaft of the arrowhead shape of the Jezreel Valley flows the Harod stream, and that southern part of the Jezreel Valley down towards Bethshan is also called the Harod Valley. Now a little west of the Harod spring is the town of Jezreel, where Ahab and Jezebel had a palace. Now on the opposite side of the Harod Valley from Jezreel is the hill of Moreh. Now it would have been on this hill that many of Gideon's army would have broken their pitchers and blew their horns above the Midianites encamped below. Now notice three little towns around the hill of Moreh. Now Endor, on the right, is where the witch that Saul consulted was from. Now Shunem, below on the south of the hill, was where the Shumanite woman who supported Elisha's work was from, whose son was brought back to life. And just to the northwest of the hill of Moreh is Nain, which is where Jesus resurrected a widow's son. Now on the northern side of the arrowhead shape are two mountains. Mount Precipice, next to Nazareth, which overlooks the valley, and Mount Tabor, believed to be where the transfiguration of Jesus took place. Now two other places of note we'll look at are the Belvoir Castle, a Crusader castle, and Gan HaShlosha, a really beautiful swimming spot. Now I've noted here the road from Ramoth Gilead in Jordan to Jezreel. Now this would have been the road that Jehu took when he drove his chariot furiously to Jezreel and killed Ahab's son and had Jezebel killed. Now the prophet Elijah was from Tishbe in the Gilead Mountains in Jordan, though its exact location is not known for sure. Now his successor Elisha was from the town of Abel Maholah, which is right down at the bottom of this map. Now to the right of it, on the opposite side of Jordan, is the town of Jabesh Gilead. Now if you recall from the story of Saul, he saved the town from the Ammonites very early in his reign as king. Now Saul was killed on Mount Gilboa, and the Philistines hung his body on the wall of Bethshan. Now it was the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead, in gratitude for saving their town, who recovered that Saul's body from the wall of Bethshan. Now south of Bethshan is Anon, which means many springs. Now John the Baptist did most of his baptising close to Jericho, but he also baptised at Anon because there was much water there. Now one last town of note is the town of Pella, just on the right-hand side of the Jordan River. Now the town of Pella, which was also one of the 10 cities of the Decapolis, was where the early church fled to just before Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. Now here is a look at the view of the Jezreel Valley, looking east across to the hill of Moreh in the centre. Now on the left is the Nazareth Ridge, and on the right is Mount Tabor. Now to the right of the hill of Moreh is the Harod Valley and Mount Gilboa. Now here's a screenshot from my drone above Mount Carmel, looking south along the range towards Megiddo. Now on the right there you can see a Carmelite order church, which is called Mukraka, meaning the burning, which commemorates the victory of the prophet Elijah over the Baal prophets. Now in the front yard of the church is a statue of the prophet Elijah slaughtering a Baal prophet. Now remember that there were many hundreds, if not thousands of people at that particular gathering when Elijah challenged the Baal prophets. Now there does seem to be a decent gathering place just down from the church where that clearing is. Now imagine the fire coming down from heaven and consuming Elijah's sacrifice on what would have been a clear day like this one because of the drought. Now down below Mount Carmel in the valley, where the river Kishon flows, is where the Baal prophets are likely to have thought to have been slaughtered. Now I've also noted the tell of Yokneam, which sits at the lip of the Yokneam Pass. Now Yokneam was one of the Canaanite cities in the Northern Alliance that fought and lost against Joshua during the conquest. Now here's an aerial view of the Jezreel Valley, looking northeast to Mount Tabor from above Megiddo. And here's a shot I took with my drone of Megiddo with the hill of Moreh on the left in the background and Mount Gilboa on the right. Now what was funny is seeing all the cattle grazing on this site, on the side of this popular and most famous tell, which guarded the nearby Harod Pass where the international highway known as the Via Maris went through. Now this has been the scene of many battles. One particular occasion was where Josiah foolishly tried to stop Pharaoh Necho from passing through on his way to Assyria and got shot with an arrow. Now here's another drone shot of two of the gates at Megiddo. One a 4-chambered gate and another one that has 6 chambers for doing business. Now there have been 6-chambered gates found at Hazor, Megiddo and Gezer, which were 3 cities that were fortified by Solomon. Now most Egyptologists place the biblical date of the Exodus around 1450 BC, during the time of Egypt's 18th dynasty, a time known as the Late Bronze Age. Now there's a number of scholars who take a different point of view and believe that there's much better evidence for the Exodus during Egypt's 13th dynasty, during the period known as the Middle Bronze Age. Now if that were true, this would then push the Late Bronze Age, shown here in blue, forward by a few hundred years. Now if this revised chronology is correct, then the time of Solomon is likely to be found parallel with the early 18th dynasty or the Late Bronze Age. Now because most Egyptologists place the Exodus in the Late Bronze Age, they believe that the time of Solomon was the early Iron Age. However, this presents another conundrum. Now archaeologists have long noted that the archaeological finds in Israel from the early Iron Age shows Israel in a state of relative poverty that hardly matches the glorious golden age of Solomon. Now, if the reign of Solomon is dated at the same time as the 18th dynasty, during the late Bronze Age, far better archaeological evidence is able to be matched up with the Bible's view of Solomon's reign being one of great prosperity. Now, there's a large late bronze palace found at Stratum 8 at Megiddo. Now, the conventional chronology assigns this palace to the time of Akhenaten, and it's given a date of 1300 BC, which would place it smack in the middle of the time of the Judges. Now, by either of David Rolls or Emanuel Velikovsky's revised chronologies, this palace would be dated to around the time of King Solomon instead. Now, inside this palace we've found a hoard of treasures which are usually attributed to being Canaanite, not Israelite. Now, in his book, A Test of Time, David Rolls states, this magnificent hoard included gold vessels, jewellery of different styles, including gold and lapis lazuli beads, and a collection of ivory plaques. Now, one such ivory plaque has particularly piqued David Rolls' interest. Now, he notes that you can see on this ivory the Queen offering an Egyptian lotus flower, an Egyptian-style lion sphinx on his throne, and a winged sun disk above the chariot. Now, these would not be out of place if this was Solomon, since Solomon married an Egyptian princess and he fell into idolatry late in his reign. Now, we also see doves, which are a symbol of peace, which Solomon's name means, being a variation of shalom. Now, might this actually be Solomon seated on his throne? Well, there was a decent chance that it could be. Now, here's a few more pics from Megiddo, including the big trench with the early bronze Canaanite altar. And another picture shows one of the stables there. And the bottom right photo is a race between a charioteer and Gabriel from our tour. Now, this is the hill of Moreh in the middle of the Jezreel Valley. Now, Gideon's army was across the other side of the Harod Valley by the spring of Harod. Now, it would have been on the slopes of the hill of Moreh from where most of Gideon's 300 men blew their trumpets in the middle of the night, while simultaneously breaking their pitchers and lighting up their torches to startle the Midianites and throw them into a panic. Now, notice the three little towns around the hill of Moreh. Now, Endor in the top left is where the witch that Saul consulted was from. Now, Saul was also camped by Mount Gilboa, and the Philistines were camped at Shunem, near the hill of Moreh here. So Saul would have had to pass very close to the Philistine camp in order to get around them and go up to Endor. Now, Shunem on the right was where the Shunammite woman who supported Elisha's work was from, whose son was brought back to life through the prophet Elisha. Now, at the bottom left here is the town of Nain, which is where Jesus resurrected a widow's son. Now, bringing someone back from the dead at this location would have brought to mind the resurrection that Elisha did earlier, showing that Jesus came in the same power as Elisha. Now, across the Harod Valley from the hill of Moreh is the town of Jezreel, where Ahab and Jezebel had a palace. Now, notice how close it is to Iron Harod, or the Harod Spring, and Mount Gilboa. Now, Saul tried to draw the Philistines away onto the slopes of Mount Gilboa in order to nullify the Philistines' tactical advantage of using chariots in the plain. Now, Israel, however, would still lose that battle, and Saul and Jonathan would die on the slopes there of Mount Gilboa. Now, the Harod Valley here near Tel Jezreel is about on sea level. Now, by the time you go down to Bethshan towards the Jordan River, the valley imperceptibly, I might add, has lowered by 400 feet or over 100 metres below sea level. Now, here's another drone shot showing the view across the valley, looking towards the hill of Moreh, where the Philistines were camped in the story of Gideon, and the Philistines were camped before the Battle of Gilboa against Saul. Now, swinging around to the east, we're looking down the Harod Valley towards Bethshan. Now, the tower in Jezreel was part of the defences of the city. And from it, a watchman said when Jehu was approaching that the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. And that's 2 Kings 9:20. Now, Jehu was the original fast and furious driver. Now, Jehu was stationed at Ramoth Gilead across the Jordan Valley and would have come along the road that went through Bethshan from the east. Now, Ahab's son Joram had returned to Jezreel to be healed of his wounds. Now, east of the city, near Naboth's vineyard, the two kings of Israel and Judah went out to meet Jehu, where Jehu killed Joram, king of Israel, who Jehu would succeed as king. Now, where Jehu entered the city in the east, Jezebel looked down from the tower, and Jehu asked, "Who is with me?" And seeing two eunuchs near Jezebel, called on them to throw her out of the city tower, which they did. And then Jehu ran over her with his chariot, and then the dogs licked her blood. An awful story. Now here is the Harod spring, where Gideon's army was pared down from 10,000 down to only 300 men, so God would get the glory for that victory. And another photo of our tour group. And here's a recreation of Gideon's men drinking in the two different ways. They've really turned this area into a beautiful recreation and camping park. Now here is Israel's best hidden gem in my view, the beautiful swimming spot of Gan HaShlosha along the Harod stream. Now it sounds a lot like the sloshing of water, that name. Now the site was formed by widening the stream and doing some wonderful landscaping. Now the temperature is an ideal 28 degrees all year round and is fed by springs. Now I could sense something nipping at my feet as I walked along the bottom and realised there was springs bubbling up from below. Now it truly is a magical place for a swim and my new favourite swimming spot in the whole world. Now at the bottom of the Harod Valley, at the junction of that valley and the Jordan River Valley, is the city of Bethshan. Now that structure on the side closest to us, halfway up, was where the city gate was. Now this is where Saul's body was hung up by the Philistines after his death on the city walls. Now its location gave it an important strategic importance to control the roads going through both valleys. Now being located at the edge of the Jordan Valley, it is actually below sea level. It lies some 120 metres or 400 feet below sea level. And you can see the Roman ruins in the background there. Now it is one of the tallest ancient towers in the Middle East, rising some 12 metres or 4 stories high above the surrounding plain. Now the Israelites failed to drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan, which we read of in Judges 1. Now Bethshan was renamed Scythiopolis in honour of the Scythians who had liberated Palestine from Assyrian domination. It was still named Scythiopolis during the time of Jesus. Now the Romans built a new city alongside of the old Tel, and it was one of the 10 cities of the Decapolis. Now here is the Roman theatre. Now Joe Ross's daughter Rebecca tested the acoustics here by singing a wonderful rendition of Jerusalem in the Highest here, which is fabulous. Now Bethshan served as an Egyptian administrative centre during the late Bronze Age. Now Bethshan was besieged and occupied by Seti the Great of Egypt's 19th dynasty, and his steles and the graves of the Greek mercenaries who served with him were discovered there. Now Ramses the Great, his successor, also occupied Bethshan for some time, and victory seals of both pharaohs were discovered there. Now these pharaohs ruled and occupied Bethshan according to the standard Egyptian dates during the time of the judges. Yet it is strange that no record of any Egyptian military action is mentioned at all in the book of Judges, despite it recording most other nations around Israel oppressing Israel at one time or another. Now, the victory styles, to make matters even more confusing for the standard chronology, were found in level 5, which was the strata of the Iron Age 2 period, dated to the time of the late kingdom of Judah before it fell to the Babylonians. Now, Rowe, who excavated the site in the 1930s, suggested that the stellars were, in his words, thrown up to the higher later stratum, but that sounds like quite a stretch to me. Now, if the stellars were dated to the Iron II period as suggested by the level that they were found in, then Ramses the Great did not rule around 1250 BC, but centuries later, closer to the time of the fall of the kingdom of Judah, as other evidence from Turkey supports. Now, in the nearby modern city of Bethshan, I found this wonderful statue of King David playing his harp. Now, a short drive north of Bethshan is the Crusader castle called Belvoir, which is French for good view, which is certainly very fitting as it has a magnificent view of the Jordan River Valley and the Gilead Mountains in Jordan. Now, the Sea of Galilee is just visible in the left of the top photo. Now, during the time of the judges, Hazor was the seat of Jabin, the king of Canaan, whose commander Sisera led a Canaanite army against the Israelites. Now, Deborah, the Jewish prophetess, summoned Barak of the tribe of Naphtali and gave him God's command. Go and draw toward Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and of the children of Zebulun. Now, descending from the mountain, the Israelites attacked and vanquished Sisera and the Canaanites. Now, Mount Tabor is also one of the proposed sites of the transfiguration of Jesus Christ. Now, I remember we took that windy road up to the top when I went to visit there my first time in 1999. It was quite a ride. Now, tour buses can't get up that narrow, windy road, so most tourists have to get off the bus and jump into and be shuttled by taxis and minibuses. Now, we're taking off here from Mount Precipice along the Nazareth Ridge and out over the Jezreel Valley. Now, the road below here that continues around to Mount Tabor on the left and onto the Sea of Galilee follows the path of the ancient Via Maris. Now, this happened to be one of the 2 overcast days that we had for the entire month, which was a bit of a shame because this is arguably one of the best views in Israel, and it was unfortunate I couldn't do this flight on a sunny day. And we're now looking east towards Mount Tabor, and coming around now, spinning around south to the Hill of Moray. And behind the Hill of Moray is the Mount Gilboa Range. And swinging around, we're looking towards Megiddo. Now, looking back the other way, behind Mount Precipice, we can see the town of Nazareth. Now, the ridge at the back there, the very back there, I think is a more likely place where they tried to stone Jesus than Mount Precipice here, simply because of the distance between here and the synagogue would have been too far. And courtesy of Bill Schlegel, here is the view directly above Mount Precipice, looking east towards Mount Tabor and the Hill of Moray on a clearer day. Now, the last region we're going to look at today is the region of Galilee. Now, the region's Hebrew name means district or circle. Now, Galilee is a mostly mountainous region located in northern Israel, with the exception of the Hula Valley and Sea of Galilee, if those areas are included as part of the Galilee. Now, Galilee is subdivided into the upper and lower Galilee. Now, upper and lower here refer to north and south Galilee, not to their altitude. Now, the upper Galilee includes the regions north from and including Mount Merom up to the Litani River in Lebanon and east of Tyre. The lower Galilee is the southern half of the Galilee. Now, most of the Galilee west of the Jordan River was allotted to the tribe of Naphtali. The southern half of the lower Galilee, including Nazareth, was allotted to the tribe of Zebulun. Now, the area east of the Jordan River in today's Golan Heights, ancient Bethshan, was allotted to Manasseh. Now, there is little biblical history that took place in the upper Galilee area west of the Hula Valley, except for the defeat of the northern cities' armies at the waters of Merom under Joshua. Now, we'll look at three places in the lower Galilee: Nazareth, where Jesus was raised; Cana, where Jesus did his first public miracle; and nearby Sepphoris. Now, in the Hula Valley, we'll look at Hazor, the largest ancient city in the area; Tel Dan, near the source of the Jordan River; Benias, or Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus took his disciples and made his statement, "On this rock I'll build my church." And overlooking that location is the Arab castle called Nimron and Israel's highest mountain, Mount Hermon. Now, around the Sea of Galilee, we explored the three major locations that Jesus preached to during his Galilean ministry: his own city of Capernaum, Bethsaida, and Chorazin, which is a little uphill and north of Capernaum. Now, in between them is the Mount of Beatitudes. Now, Tabor to its west is the traditional location of where Jesus restored Peter after his resurrection. Now, south of Tabor is the town of Magdala, where the Mary Magdalene came from. And overlooking Magdala is Mount Arbel. Mount Arbel is the traditional location for the giving of the Great Commission by Jesus to his disciples. Now, further south is Tiberias, where Herod Antipas ruled Galilee from. Now, on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee is Cursey, the traditional location where the pigs ran into the sea after the demons in two individuals were cast out into the pigs. Now, some other sites of interest here are Gamla, which is better known as the Masada of the north; Sicida or Hippos, one of the towns of the Decapolis; and Yardenet, a popular baptismal place on the Jordan River. Now, Nazareth backs onto a cliff face called Mount Precipice, overlooking the Jezreel Valley, which you can see in the photo on the left, with the hill of Moreh in the distance. Now, in Jesus' day, Nazareth was a very small town with only a few hundred people. Now, today is a sprawling city of about 80,000. Now, in Nazareth, there is a church that was built over an early synagogue called the Synagogue Church, shown on the right here, which is traditionally believed to be the synagogue that Jesus preached in. Now, Jesus was almost killed by the very townfolk that he grew up with. Now, after quoting examples of God's mercy to the Gentiles over the Israelites, they took him to a cliff in order to stone him. Now, Mount Precipice on the left is actually about a 2-hour walk from the synagogue church, so perhaps the hilltop at the top of the photo on the right may have been the more likely location of that event. Now, the story where they turn on him after he quotes God's examples of mercy to the Gentiles illustrates the extreme xenophobia amongst some pockets of the Jews against the Gentiles that Jesus and the apostles had to contend with at times. Now, in 1997, work began on a project to reconstruct what life was like in Nazareth during the time of Jesus. Now, before work began on the site, an archaeological survey was done which turned up some interesting rare archaeological finds. Now, remains of farming terraces dated by pottery to the 1st century were discovered. Now, also discovered the remains of not one but 3 harvest watchtowers from around the same time, where farmers would live in during the harvest time to guard their crops. Now, Jesus made reference to one of these harvest towers in a parable in Matthew 21. Now, he also says in that same parable that the landowner dug a winepress. Now, at this site, they also found dug into the bedrock a winepress where grapes would be thrown into, and workers would tread on the grapes, from which a narrow channel would take the juice into a large chamber that collected the juice and that would then be fermented. Now, here are a few more shots from when we were at Nazareth village. The top photo is inside the synagogue. Bottom left there shows Rebecca outside a tomb with a rolling stone. Then we've got an olive press and the Nelsons under some of the vines there. Now, not far from Nazareth, ruins were discovered only a few decades ago of a large city called Sepphoris, which sits on a hill overlooking the lovely Bet-Netophah Valley. Now, this city was built around the same time as Jesus was growing up, though many of its Roman features, such as the colonnaded street and theatre, date from after the time of Jesus. Now, Nazareth was a small town at the time, and not much building would have been going on there, so it's likely that Jesus' father, Joseph, and perhaps Jesus did some building work here at Sepphoris. Now, Sepphoris was a city on a hill as per what Jesus referred to in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, there was a Jewish rebellion against Roman rule when Herod the Great died in 4 BC, and some 2,000 men were crucified right here in Sepphoris. Now, Jesus may have drawn on this when talking about taking up one's cross. Now, it would have been the burning memory of that event that led Sepphoris to stay loyal to Rome during the Jewish rebellion and being spared destruction. Now, Sepphoris has some wonderful mosaics, including what has been referred to as the Mona Lisa of the Galilee. Now, next to the Mona Lisa mosaic is a U-shaped white area, which is where couches called a triclinium were placed for Roman feasts. Now, those feasting would recline on them with food served on the inside, which we would probably today call finger food, and often eaten with pieces of bread. Now, this would have been how dinner was set up for Jesus' last Passover. Now, this also explains why John was resting on Jesus' bosom or chest. Now, the triclinium helps also to explain the 2 occasions where women who anointed Jesus' feet when he was dining with others. Now, the women weren't actually under the table, but on the outside of the triclinium. Now, Luke 7:38, the sinful woman, it says, stood at his feet behind him, weeping. Now, Cana was the place where Jesus performed his first public miracle at a wedding feast where the host was short of wine for the week-long celebration. Now, Jesus turned 6 stone water pots full of water into wine. Truly a superpower I'm sure we'd all love to have at some stage. Now, Cana was also where Philip's friend Nathanael came from and where he healed an official's son. Now, several locations have been proposed, but the strongest candidate appears to be Cana. Now, this site is located on a limestone outcropping on the northern floor of the Bet-Netophah Valley, across the valley from Sepphoris to the south. Now, there's a more touristy but less likely candidate called Cana to the east of Sepphoris. Now, Mark 2:1 we read, and again he entered into Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Now, in the parallel account in Matthew 9, it says that he came to his own city, indicating that Capernaum was where he was living. Now, Jesus did not choose to base his ministry out of Nazareth, where he was raised, but in Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee. Now, it's one of the most beautiful places in the land of Israel and one of my favourites. Now, to be in such a nice place on the water might have been part of the motivation, but the main reason was much more strategic. Now, one messianic prophecy that Jesus fulfilled is found at the start of Isaiah 9, which talks about how those in Galilee and the old tribal areas of Zebulun and Naphtali have seen a great light. It also mentions by the way of the sea. Now, the way of the sea here is not a generic term, but a geographic reference. Now, it refers to that ancient highway that ran past Capernaum called the Via Maris, which is Latin for way of the sea, as it later goes along the Mediterranean coast after it reaches Caesarea en route to Egypt. Now, basing his ministry in this location on the Via Maris allowed word of what Jesus did and taught to be spread far and wide by those who travelled through Capernaum. Now, this is part of how his fame spread throughout the whole land. Now there was also a Roman garrison stationed there, and we meet the centurion who was stationed there in the Gospels. And also collecting tax for the Romans at this strategic place was Matthew Levi, who Jesus called to be one of his disciples. Now here's some aerial footage of the town of Capernaum. Now the two dominant features here are the octagonal church over the top of what is believed to be Peter's house, and the 4th century marble synagogue built over the 1st century basalt synagogue. Now Mark 1:21 says that Jesus entered the synagogue at Capernaum. Now there are the remains of a synagogue in Capernaum that you can visit today. Now its upper section of white marble is from 300 years after the time of Jesus, but the basalt foundation is from the time of Jesus. Now Luke 7 we read of the healing of the centurion's servant. Now his garrison was based nearby, and the Jews said that he loves our nations and has built us a synagogue, the same synagogue that Jesus would teach in. Now after he came out of the synagogue at Capernaum in Mark 1, it says here that he entered the house of Simon Peter and Andrew. Now the Franciscans in excavating Capernaum found the remains of a 5th century octagonal Byzantine church. Now under that church was another church with evidence of plastered walls. Now underneath that church were remnants of a simple house with rooms around a courtyard. Now coins, pottery and lamps were found in the house dating it to the 1st century. Now fishing hooks and items indicate it was occupied by fishermen. Now Etheria in the 300s AD wrote that a church had been built over what was believed to have been Peter and Andrew's house. Now Capernaum, because of the hard basalt in the area, was also a centre for the manufacture of millstones as well as olive oil. Now near the house of Peter is this millstone and an olive press. Now the initial squeezing of olives was done on the millstone, and then crushed olives would be placed underneath the olive press to be squeezed even more for the precious olive oil, which was used for lighting, cooking, anointing and other purposes. Now the Greek word for an olive press was Gethsemane, as in the Garden of Gethsemane. Now like an olive press, Jesus had the weight of the world's sins pressing down on him and squeezing out his blood. Now Jesus would often use very vivid imagery to teach lessons about the right way to live. Now one of them is found in Mark 9:42, where we read, "And whosoever shall offend one of these little ones who believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hanged around his neck and he were cast into the sea." Now imagine that millstone there being hung around your neck and being cast into the nearby Sea of Galilee. I mean, you really get the impression that God takes very seriously the way that we treat those people that we might think of as little ones or unimportant. Now we read in John 1:44 that 3 of Jesus' disciples, Andrew, Peter and Philip, came originally from Bethsaida. Now, as we just saw before, Andrew and Peter later moved to Capernaum. Now Etel, which is higher up and inland from the shore, has traditionally been identified as Bethsaida. Now despite the abundance of fishing hooks, this site is too high to have been along the shore in Jesus' day, as Capernaum would have been underwater if it was. Now recently, another better site shown here as El Araj has been unearthed, including the remains of a Roman bathhouse, and it appears to be a better candidate for the biblical Bethsaida, just near where the Jordan River enters the Sea of Galilee. Now a few kilometres drive north of the Mount of Beatitudes is another town where Jesus preached, the town of Chorazin. Now this is a fascinating site to visit in Israel. Now there are ruins of an early Jewish synagogue here and an example too of a Moses seat, which is where the person doing the weekly reading of the Torah would sit on. Now in the bottom left photo here you see me sitting on the Moses seat reading from the Torah. Now the traditional site for where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount is the Mount of Beatitudes, a short distance west of Capernaum. Now there's a lovely memorial church that has been built there, and the location gives a wonderful panorama of the Sea of Galilee. Now on the first Sabbath of our dig tour, we had a lovely outdoor service at Tabor on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. Now Jeff here didn't have a guitar, but he prayed that he might have one for this service. And just as we pulled in, he saw this guy with a guitar and just casually went over and asked him if he could borrow it, and he was all too happy to lend it to him. It's quite amazing. Now Tabor is also the traditional location of where Jesus cooked breakfast and restored Peter after his resurrection. Now south of Tabor is the town of Magdala, where Mary Magdalene came from. And what you're seeing here is a first century church. So this would have been actually one of the synagogues that Jesus would have preached in. Now overlooking Magdala is Mount Arbel. Now Mount Arbel is the traditional location for the giving of the Great Commission by Jesus to his disciples. Now we enjoyed a lovely boat cruise on the Sea of Galilee when we were there, and you can see Mount Arbel in the background there. Now further south on the west coast of the sea is Tiberias, where Herod Antipas ruled Galilee from, and it seems to be a place that Jesus actually deliberately avoided going to in case he ran into trouble. Now this is where we were slumming it in Tiberias. Not a bad view though, over the Sea of Galilee. And we got to enjoy some pool and spa time while we were there as well. Now on the northeast shore of the lake is the steep cliff known as called Kersey. It's the traditional location where the pigs ran into the sea after the demons of two individuals were cast out and into the pigs. Now this is Caesarea or Hippos, as it's also called, on a high cliff on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. Now it was actually the closest of the 10 cities of the Decapolis to where Jesus was based at Capernaum. Now one thing that was a whole lot of fun and a real highlight of the trip for me was rafting on the Jordan River just north of the Sea of Galilee. Now here's a short video combining a clip I found on the internet with the one I took along the way. So that's how we launched into the sea. It was pretty cool. And here's a couple of other photos. Now the best part of this for me was that I didn't have to do any work and I could just chill and enjoy the scenery. Now going further north of the Sea of Galilee is the city of Hazor on the edge of the Hula Valley. Now Hazor was the major city of the Northern Confederation of cities that were allied and ultimately defeated during the Israelite conquest under Joshua. Now, the city of Hazor, led by Jabin, was burned. Now, standard Egyptian chronology places the conquest under Joshua in the late Bronze Age. Now, the revised chronologies of Roll and Velkovsky place the conquest of Joshua in the Middle Bronze Age. Now, Hazor, like many other cities in Israel, has a Middle Bronze Age destruction level. Now the Bible says that after Joshua's time, the city was again reoccupied by the Canaanites in the time of Deborah and Barak during the time of Judges, when another king, also named Jabin, was defeated. Now Jabin is likely to have been a title rather than a proper name like Pharaoh, Ben-Hadad, Hiram and Abimelech. Now archaeologists have found no further Canaanite occupation after the late Bronze Age destruction. Now there was, however, a Canaanite occupation after the earlier Middle Bronze destruction, which to me implies the revised chronology is a better fit for the archaeology. Now the waters of Merom was the location where the armies of the Northern Confederation of cities led by Hazor were ambushed at and defeated in battle by Joshua during the conquest. Now, Merom is commonly identified with Lake Hula in the upper part of the Jordan Valley. Now, Josephus says that the camp of the Allies was at Beroth in Upper Galilee, talking about the Allies of the Northern Confederation, and that Beroth was not far from Kadesh, which is upon the summit of the Galilee hills. Now, the waters of Merom might also be the spring called Ein Merom in the heights of the Upper Galilee, though this is an unusually mountainous area to bring chariots. Now, originally the inheritance of Dan was from the Sorek Valley, west of Jerusalem to the coast of Mediterranean coast. Now, due to dissatisfaction with it and pressure from the Philistines, most of Dan moved north to the northern lush part of the Hula Valley, though some stayed, such as Samson's family. Now, they defeated the Canaanites of Laish and they renamed it to Dan. Now, when Israel split into two kingdoms following the death of Solomon, Dan and Bethel in Ephraim became the location of the two golden bulls that Jeroboam I set up, leading the northern kingdom into a corrupted form of Yahwehism that God considered as idolatry. Now, for a long time, Bible critics claimed that there was no record of David's existence outside of the Bible and dismissed David as a real historical king. Now, the critics were silenced when part of a victory stela of an Aramean king was found by Abraham buried at Tel Dan near the Iron Age 2 gate. Now, on the victory stela of an Aramean king believed to be Hazael announces that he has subdued the king of Israel and another king from the house of David. Now, the kings he subdued are believed to be Ahab's son Jehoram and Jehoshaphat's grandson Ahaziah. Now, here's some more photos of Tel Dan. Now, the top photo shows one of the sources of the Jordan River. The bottom left photo is the mud brick Middle Bronze Age gate, which potentially Abraham may have passed through during his pursuits of the kings of the east. And the bottom right photo shows where the altar and the golden calf platform was set up by Jeroboam I at Tel Dan. Now, near the end of his ministry, before he went to Jerusalem to give his life for the world, Jesus said in Matthew 16:18, "I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Now, when Jesus spoke these words to his disciples, he'd take them up to Caesarea Philippi, up near Tel Dan and the source of the Jordan River. Now, at Caesarea Philippi, there was a pagan temple to the Greek god Pan, who was half man, half goat. And it was near the great cave from which an underground spring fed the waters that fed the Jordan River. Now, from a Greco-Roman perspective, this cave literally was a gate to hell, or the underworld, as the Greek word Hades, for hell here, is Hades, which means both the grave and the underworld where the dead go to. Now, the great rock cliff face where the spring water came out was also known as the Rock of the Gods, which is why Jesus talks about himself there as the rock on which the church is built. Now, this location would have made a dramatic impression as Jesus talked about the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of Satan, where Jesus pronounced that the kingdom of God would ultimately be victorious. Now, many people misunderstand the passage to say that hell is attacking the church but won't succeed. Now, to any first century listener, the use of the word gate would have immediately sprung to mind the gate of a city, and hell here is pictured as a city with gates. So, who is attacking who? Now, to say that hell, which is compared to a city with gates, is attacking the church makes no sense in this case. Now, there is a couple of possibilities for understanding this passage. The first is that God is breaking those of the church and later the world out of hell, whose gates and defences are holding us in. If you recall the old worldwide Church of God booklet, a world held captive with a globe and iron bars. or the it here, shall not prevail against it, is not the church, but the rock of Christ that the gates of hell will not prevail against. Now, even if we die, the gates of hell won't hold us in, as God will resurrect us. Now, the other possibility of the it being Jesus Christ brings to mind the prophecy of Daniel 2 of a stone without hands utterly destroying every vestige of the kings of the world when he sets up the kingdom of God on earth at his second coming. Now, Mount Hermon is Israel's tallest peak that often has snow on, and the best known reference from the Bible to it is Psalm 133. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious oil upon the head running down on the beard of Aaron, running down on the edge of his garments. It is like the dew of Hermon descending upon the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, life forevermore. Now, guarding the road from Damascus, not far from Mount Hermon, is Nimrod Castle, which is a castle that was built during the Muslim Empire. So that brings us to the end of our look at the geography of northern Israel. Now, when I'm up here next time, we'll continue our virtual tour by exploring central Israel. Now, I'm scheduled to be up here again about 5 weeks' time on November 25, so I look forward to speaking with you all then. Thank you.